Welcome back to this already the final segment of today's Price of Business, and I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. And really, it's your business to be really aware of what's happening in the business and legal front. The law affects us every single day. The more we know about it, the more prepared we are for it, which is exactly why I like to spend time with our regular contributor, Lee Kaplan. He is an attorney with the law firm of Spicer, Kaplan and Veselka, skd.com. And I love what your firm does. I love its swagger and reputation in the legal community. Tell us a little bit more about it before we get into our topic.
Our firm is basically a civil litigation firm with white-collar criminal law practitioners as well. We really don't do divorce work and family law, and we don't really do any bankruptcy work. Otherwise, it's generally all civil litigation, and then, as I say, white-collar criminal matters. So that, for example, the things I've done in the last year, tried a trade secret case in federal court, a 2-week jury trial, which we prevailed and got a multi-million-dollar verdict, and represented an automobile dealer from San Antonio in an administrative hearing in Austin for a week in complaints that he had against the manufacturer over the allocation of vehicles and other discriminatory treatment. One of my colleagues right now is about to go to trial with me assisting him in a case where our client bought some company for $35 million, and the people who got $35 million are now saying, well, you should have given us another $3 million. So we're taking depositions and getting ready for a November 8th trial. So it's just all sorts of business disputes and both trials and arbitrations and then appeals.
Yep, no question about it. You guys are very busy. Speaking of busy, so a lot of the stories out there. You were telling me once before we began the segment on some regulations that are getting some headlines. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, this has been brewing for a while, the issue of who is an independent contractor versus who is an employee. And naturally, businesses would prefer to have people classified as independent contractors for a number of economic reasons. The Obama administration and the Department of Labor has been, I guess, alarmed by this. And in the last 3 months or 4 months, they've issued more, what I guess I would call a discussion. There is something called an administrator's interpretation, and you can find this at the Department of Labor website. And it sets out the parameters for how you decide whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. But I think what I would say is it tilts much more heavily in favor of finding people as employees. And I think that the commentators believe that will mean approximately 5 million workers in the United States who might have previously been characterized as independent contractors falling under the classification of employees, meaning that they get minimum wage and overtime protection and probably other things as well. So if you have a question about it and you don't want to run afoul of some after-the-fact determination by the Department of Labor, you've done the wrong thing, I'd recommend going to the Department of Labor website and looking for what's called the Administrator's Interpretation, and I believe it came out in July of 2015. So that's something that all employers need to think about very hard.
Yeah, and I don't think this is going to go away. You know, a lot of people are, looking forward, to this thought that the Republicans could come and change a lot of the things that Obama's done. I have my doubts that this would go away once it gets 2 years of traction underneath it.
Well, it's hard to strip away regulations. The last president who people thought of as a true revolutionary was Ronald Reagan, and I don't believe that the Code of Federal Regulations got any shorter during his 8 years as president. So
probably true.
Once these things are enacted, it's hard to undo them.
That's probably true. Talk a little bit about the HERO amendment. We're now, I'm beginning to wonder how big of an impetus it's going to be to get people to vote. What kind of ripple effect? Because Houston's kind of purple but leans blue as far as the way it votes for the city. Purple leans red for the way it votes county. But I'm wondering if there's going to be some red pervasive throughout the city because of this Hero Amendment. And begin by giving us a little bit more background on Hero.
Well, I would have to say that the Hero Ordinance has generally been mishandled by the city from start to finish and has made it more controversial than it might otherwise have been. And without going into those details, I think the mayor and her advisors were always too clever by half. My personal belief is that Houston is pretty much a laissez-faire city. All they really care about is are people working. They just don't care. And probably, this is again my own bias, that people don't think too much about bathrooms and are there going to be transgendered people using the wrong bathrooms. They don't think about it too much. But somehow the mayor managed to make this more of a controversy by what I would call fairly ham-handed efforts to have this ordinance passed and then to not have a referendum. And what's interesting to me now, as I graze the channels late at night and happen to watch some of the commercials, is that the African-American community may be somewhat split on this. That's usually a fairly reliable vote for what I would call liberal policies, and yet there are many pastors in the African-American community who apparently are upset about this, and you've got at least one candidate for mayor, Ben Hall, who has made it somewhat of a signature element of his electoral campaign. So there'll be higher turnout because we've got this mayoral election with many candidates, plus this ordinance, and I think that's going to make this vote a lot closer than people might have otherwise expected from a city that's, considered to be pretty laissez-faire.
Yeah, that is one area where blacks as a group are not particularly liberal on. In fact, in 2008 in California, while the 70% of blacks voted for Barack Obama, 70% of blacks voted against the state amendment to legalize same-sex marriage. So that's an interesting block when it comes to that particular issue. I, for one, think it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. I do believe that it was heavy-handed the way that the city government did it, and it kind of begged for a challenge, didn't it?
Well, but public opinion can turn on a dime, and I really don't know what's going to happen. And the polling seems to me to be fairly tentative. I think people are just spending a lot of money on ads, and they have too little money to spare to do a lot of polling. So if I were to guess, and it's what I would call a soft guess, is that the Hero Ordinance will be passed or will be affirmed or whatever the right word is. But I think the majority will be smaller than many expected. If I were to guess, I'd say 55, maybe 60%, because I think there'll be heavy turnout on the west side, very heavy turnout because of this mayoral election.
Yeah, interesting.
And a lot of people feeling that the city has financial issues that haven't been addressed. So
yes,
interesting.
Very interesting. We've got a few more minutes left. Any other issue you want to bring to the audience attention?
Well, there's sort of a stealth issue that comes out of Austin a little bit, and it's the Texas Supreme Court issuing a ruling that may or may not be what I would call a one-off ruling, kind of a just this situation only. There is, many people are aware, we have lots of agencies, even in the state of Texas, that regulate all sorts of activities, whether it's barbershops, car dealers, liquor licensing. There's a 5-4 decision back in June, I believe, maybe May, but June, called Patel versus Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. And this was the case in which the plaintiffs who do eyebrow threading, it's a way of shaping eyebrows and removing eyebrow hair using cotton thread. Apparently, Texas was requiring eyebrow threaders to get a cosmetology license, 750 hours of training, and almost half of that had no relation whatsoever to what activities eyebrow threaders perform. And ultimately, the Texas Supreme Court said this was an unreasonable regulation. Now, that may sound, well, that's kind of common sense, but the truth is, it is extraordinarily rare for a state regulation to be struck down even by a state Supreme Court. And there is no unanimity among the 5 justices who voted to strike down the regulation, and no unanimity among the 4 justices who didn't think that this was so unreasonably burdensome that it was oppressive. And so it's unclear what the standard is. It's almost one of these, well, I know it when I see it. In fact, I think Justice Don Willett wrote something along the lines of, if we don't throw this one out, then there's no regulation that can be thrown out. And it was sort of a, hey, in this case, I know it when I see it, which is the old Potter Stewart statement about obscenity, sort of applies here. This just seems so ridiculous that 5 Supreme Court justices, and I'm talking Texas Supreme Court justices, felt that this was so oppressive that it violated the Texas Constitution. So
I think that's interesting, and it's interesting. I've had Charles Murray on my show, and he's got a new book called By the People, and it's about this idea of revolting against regulations, particularly these really relatively minor esoteric ones that infringe on liberty. Be interesting to get his spin on it, but it is so rare, and I'm sitting here hearing you talk about it, and I don't think I've ever heard of such, to be honest with you. Right.
Well, as I say, the 5 justices who struck it down were not unanimous among themselves as to the right standard. And I'm guessing that the standard that Justice Boyd talked about is just that the question is this arbitrary and unreasonable, even giving the great deference that we give to a state legislature and the executive carrying out its wishes to issue regulations. And so I don't know. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Nathan Hecht, who's the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, actually dissented and said he would have upheld the regulation. Well, making Nathan Hecht out to be a liberal is probably hard to do. So this could be one of these very rare situations that doesn't recur, or it could be the thin opening that'll get us started on attacking a number of regulations that are issued by the state of Texas. I think you can expect to see people citing this case in an effort to overturn regulations. Now, whether they'll be successful, we'll just have to see how that plays out in the next few years.
Well, yeah, I would appreciate if you send me a link to that article. I think we might elaborate on that over at Huffington Post, my column at Huffington Post.
You're talking about the Patel case?
Yeah, and I'll get some quotes from you on that, because I think that is interesting. Lee Kaplan, he is a record.
This was in the Washington Post, of all places, and it's a column by Eugene Volokh, Volokh, who is a fairly influential commentator on things about free speech, church-state relations, First Amendment issues, and other issues that relate to economic regulation. Washington Post, June 26th column that he wrote, where he talked about this. But this is a case that's excited some comment in Texas, and it's called Patel, P-A-T-E-L.
Very interesting. If you want to send me that link, I appreciate it, sir. I'm looking for it, but I don't quite see it. You can send it to me. That'd be awesome.
I will send one to you.
Thank you. Lee Kaplan, he is with Smicer, Kaplan, and Paselka. You can see why he's a regular on The Price of Business. His website, skb.com. And also, we got lots of great articles by him over there at usdailyreview.com. Make sure you check those out. All right, when we come back for you on tomorrow's program, we're going to have much more for you. We want to remind you the program continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. And our best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com. And this has been The Price of Business.